Good morning, buenos dias, bonjour, guten Morgen. Good morning, everybody. It's great to welcome you all here in Strasbourg for a very special session where we will, of course, discuss tomorrow the State of the Union and to have with us our Group President, Iratxe García Perez, to whom I will hand over. And then, of course, it's time for your questions afterwards. Iratxe.
Thank you. Good morning, everybody. Buenos días a todos.
Good morning to all of you. I hope that you have had a very good summer break, an opportunity to rest and to enjoy spending time with your families. And I hope that you're now feeling ready for this final period of the legislative period that's coming up. And I'm sure that the topics on the agenda will be important for our daily work in this Parliament. I wanted to start this press conference with a message of solidarity with the people of Morocco and with the people of Greece and the people of Libya. Over this last week, they have been suffering from the consequences of natural disasters which have cost the lives of thousands of people. So we would like to express our support to the families involved, and perhaps that also says something for the positions that we've defended when it comes to the need to strengthen our solidarity and civil protection systems and to do more to support the countries and regions which are suffering situations of the kind that we have seen over the summer, also in countries like Slovenia, Italy, Spain. I think it's very important to make that point. And I also wanted to express the Socialist and Democrat support and solidarity for the family of Emmanuel, a Spanish aid worker who was killed in Ukraine. And I think that shows us the cruelest face of the war. So we would like to express our full support for the family and also to recognize all of the work that she did as an aid worker. And indeed, we would pay tribute to the work that all aid workers are carrying out around the world. Coming on to the substance of this plenary session, as you know, it is going to be focusing on the last State of the Union debate that we will be holding in this legislative period. As you know, the Socialist and Democrat group have contributed throughout these previous years to the work that has been done. The support for the Commission and the Commission President von der Leyen has always been conditional on a progressive agenda. And I think we should recognise that we have made a lot of progress over the last 4 years. However, there is much left to be done. And I think this may be the message that we relay in tomorrow's debate. You should have received a table which I think is very helpful and quite well visualized. And here we give an overview of the work. So we look at what achievements have been made by the European Union over these recent years and which things have been pushed through by our political group, by commissioners from our political group, for example, on social matters, on the Green Deal, women's rights, or building a more sustainable economy, also defending the rule of law. These are all issues which have marked the political agenda over recent years, and the Socialist and Democrats group have had a key role in that. So moving towards a more socially just Europe with the minimum wage, protecting platform workers, and also including measures for wage equality, progress in terms of the green transition with a red heart to it, a mechanism for the just transition. But what we're now calling for from Ms. von der Leyen is, firstly, that we don't want to give way at all when it comes to the ambition that we set out at the beginning of the legislative period. There are political forces out there that want to come to a standstill or even go back on the level of ambition, but we want to maintain the level of ambition. We don't want to go backwards. We want to complete the Green Deal, and that means completing negotiations on the nature restoration law and also on the air quality law. That's something that we'll be voting on in this plenary. And we have seen what the outcome was of the vote in committee, and so we'll have to see what happens in plenary. Once again, we have seen an alliance between the right and the far right in this parliament to try to overturn that proposal. Once again, the EPP has joined ECR and ID to try to ensure that we don't get this law through. And once again, Mr. Weber will have an opportunity. He'll have an opportunity to set out this alliance. What does he mean by isolating the extreme right? He says that, but it seems to be just words, and it doesn't seem very coherent because he continues to vote with them. That we saw that with the nature restoration law. They seem to be moving that way with the air quality law, and these are vital pieces of legislation if we're to make progress on the Green Deal. As I say, climate change is a reality. We saw that this summer. We've seen a lot of these disasters around Europe, and we have a responsibility to act. So that will be the broad outline of our focus when it comes to the State of Union debate. There are other important issues on this week's agenda. We have the issue of Tunisia. And on that, the Socialist and Democrat group is very clear. The EU agreement with Tunisia does not reflect human rights legislation. It does not uphold our values. We are externalizing border management. That fails to guarantee minimum rights for asylum seekers. It's not right to send a message of this kind from Europe. We are handing out money without any preconditions, and we're handing that cash over to a government which, as we've seen, does not uphold human rights. We've had debates in this parliament, urgent motions on human rights in Tunisia, with regard to journalists, for example, with regard to what the government is doing to migrants in that country. So it is completely unacceptable. It is unacceptable that European taxpayers' money is being spent to fund governments who are undermining fundamental human rights. And that is why it is so important that we hold this debate. People are fleeing from Tunisia because of worsening repression. And that is why it is so important that we deal with this issue seriously and responsibly within the Parliament. We will also be adopting a report to increase transparency and accountability. So the Bureau of Parliament has decided on some measures which were aimed to increase transparency in the fight against corruption within the European Parliament. So the Metsola presidency measures that you may recall. The AFCO committee was then charged to look at how those measures could be implemented. How could we put them into practice? The AFCO vote was very significant because what we saw was that the EPP, which is supposed to be setting an example to others, voted against alongside the ECR and ID. So we will see what happens to that report when it comes to the plenary vote. But in any case, once again, Mr. Weber says that he wants to cooperate with pro-European forces, but you don't see that happening in reality in the Parliament. And I'd also like to know what President Metsola thinks about the position which has been taken by the EPP in the Constitutional Affairs Committee, because we're looking at how to implement the measures that were adopted under the auspices of the President of the Parliament. So I hope we'll be able to take up this issue ahead of the vote, and I hope the EPP will take responsibility. But if once again they vote against this report, then they will not have any credibility, not Mr. Weber nor anyone else in his group, when it comes to transparency and fighting corruption. So we had a group meeting in Madrid in the Socialist and Democrat Party. You know that occasionally we have group meetings in different member states, and the idea is that we can hold debates around different countries in the EU. I think you can see that Spain is setting a clear example of how you can put a stop to the aspirations of the far right and alliances between the right and far right, which could turn into governments. And I think this sends an important message to the rest of Europe. We need to continue to cooperate and work together. We need to stand up for a Europe based on values. We need to make progress when it comes to social justice, equality, rights and opportunities. So you should be able to see our agenda, and we will be having debates both at a governmental level and also with civil society. We also try to visit projects which have to do with the European agenda, and I hope that will be interesting for everyone. So I'm going to leave it there, and that should leave some opportunity for any questions that you may have, and perhaps come back on some of these issues. Thank you very much.
Thanks a lot, Iratxe. And just to highlight that the documents with our key achievements and key demands Iratxe showed you is also here in the front in this room, together also with the letter in printed copy, which Iratxe sent on behalf of the group to Ursula von der Leyen. Now it's time for your questions. Who wants to go first? Laura. And of course, everybody, please introduce yourselves.
Sí, hola, buenos días. Laura Zornoza para EFE. Iratxe, ayer en...
Hello, Iratxe. Now, in the Bureau, there was a discussion about adding Spanish languages to the plenary. Now, you've got the 5 vice presidents, of course, your vice presidents, but of course, you know, at times in the Bureau, they will vote differently, you know, how many votes, you know, in favor or against. Well, you know, the Socialists and Democrats already expressed their position yesterday, so in favor of this request by the Spanish government when it comes to the use of Spain's co-official languages in the plenary of the European Parliament. And the decision is that we will be dealing with this matter in forthcoming meetings of the Bureau, and I very much hope that following on from that debate in the Bureau, this is something that will come to pass, and I hope that in actual fact we will bring this in as quickly as possible. We just have to wait, you know, hope that there will be a majority for this decision to be taken. Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, Thomas, please.
Thomas Kutschka, Frankfurter Allgemeine Zeitung, regarding the Tunisia Memorandum of Understanding. If you, and I understand you wholeheartedly think it's wrong, do you see any other way to reduce irregular migration via Tunisia and Libya, if not with such agreements? Thank you.
Claro que hay.
Yes, of course there are other solutions. What we actually need is people to show responsibility and political will, you know, to deal with this once and for all and to conclude our negotiations on the Migration Pact. Now, this is a process which deals with migration holistically. So migration cannot be reduced to border control. Of course, you've got to control your borders. I'm not saying you shouldn't, but that's not all it is about. You can't just control your borders. As I say, this has to be a holistic, overarching policy of cooperation with these countries, but genuine cooperation. The kind of cooperation makes it possible to improve the lives and prospects of people who, of course, are entitled to live out their lives in their own countries. That is what is absolutely crucial. So, of course, we need to have development policies. They've got to work on their own economies and political stability and growing their own economies. And so we've got to look at the kinds of initiatives which generate jobs and opportunities. And that is an important facet of cooperation with these countries. But cooperation doesn't mean just handing out money to governments which flout human rights, to get them to detain migrants on their borders. That's not cooperation. Cooperation really is something much more serious. Cooperation is something that we're already doing with certain other countries. So that's what we need with the countries of North Africa. And of course, cooperation also involves everything pertaining to solidarity with member states and with people who are fleeing countries, often fleeing war, starvation, different kinds of vulnerabilities, attacks on their rights, and all of these things have to be dealt with under the umbrella of the Migration Pact. And then, of course, there are all kinds of other issues which also have a bearing on this phenomenon, the kind of integration policies that we have to conduct within the European Union. But basically, in a nutshell, migration policy is complex, and it's not just about building walls or trying to put in place the kinds of controls that the EPP is talking about. We've got to be much more serious than that. I mean, there's no black and white in this debate. I mean, it's important that we talk a great deal, that we have dialogue, and that we try and cut deals, broker agreements, and we all understand that, but in a negotiation, of course, we've all got to perhaps, forego some of our preferences in order to achieve a common agreement. We're all aware of that.
Critical raw materials.
Can you introduce yourself?
Anna Vandensky from Europe Diplomatic. I have a question on raw materials, because the need for lithium and the other precious metals for Green Deal are rising with solar energy, etc. And my question to you is how to avoid dependency on China, because at present China is the leading exporter of raw materials, precious raw materials for Europe.
Sí, como ustedes.
Well, as you'll be aware, the Commission has come forward with a proposal looking at how we can reduce our dependence when it comes to raw materials, particularly on China. China, of course, being one of the leading powers in this regard. Not the only one, by the way. There are other countries which also have reserves of the kinds of critical raw materials that we need and that which our industry uses, and it's something that we're talking about here in the Parliament and trying to thrash out a position on this. Of course, on the one hand, there is a possibility that we look at producing the raw materials ourselves to the extent that that is possible in the European Union with the kinds of social and environmental standards that we champion. And then, of course, on the other hand, you've got cooperation with other countries. So, make sure that we're not dependent exclusively on one part of the world. But this is something we're discussing right now. This is in the Commission as well as in various parliamentary committees, and I very much hope that we will be able to move forward and look at the kind of position we can arrive at in this Parliament as well as subsequently, and then look at going into negotiations with the Council.
Eddie, please.
Thank you, Eddie from Politico. On the Green Deal, with the absence of Frans Timmermans from your political group, do you think there's, are you seeing evidence, for example, this vote on wolves, there's something on air pollution this week, that the EPP or other groups to your right are kind of exploiting the absence of Frans Timmermans? And do you think that Maros Šefčovič is, up to the task of fully replacing him? Is he someone with as good green credentials? Thanks.
Por supuesto que
Yes, of course, Šefčovič will stand up for the interest not just of our political family. Of course, he's a member of the Commission. He will stand up for the interests of the Commission, of the College of Commissioners as a whole. They started this legislative period with objectives, and they need to press on with those objectives and not give ground. The PP can give whatever excuses it wants when it comes to their lack of commitment to the Green Deal. But really, what they're demonstrating with their votes over time, well, we saw it before summer with the nature restoration law, and we saw it last week when it came to air quality. What we're seeing is that, on the one hand, they have their rhetoric, and on the other hand, there's the reality. And the reality is that they don't have any kind of commitment to this. But I don't think there's any problem with the Commission at the moment. The Commission has done its job in terms of coming forward with the legislative proposals, and the situation now is that we need to do our job as a parliament, and then we will see the trialogues with the Council once the Council has a general approach on these various issues. So when it comes to the nature restoration law, we have that general approach. So what we can do is now perhaps see the Commission helping us through trialogue so that we reach a final position. And when it comes to air quality, we'll have to wait and see what comes from the PP's vote this week.
Thank you. Are there further questions? Yes, please go ahead.
Emmanuel Garreta Le Point.
Emmanuel Barreté Lapointe.
Who can lead the next European campaign for the SND, Spitzenkandidat? Have you got some preferences?
el grupo del...
As regards the S&D group and the S&D family, as things stand, we are currently working on policies that will change people's lives and on the political priorities, the social dimension, the green dimension, the issue of justice and equality between men and women. So we're focusing on our political priorities first and foremost. How do we want to change Europe? And then subsequently we will come on to the debate on the people involved as part of the decisions that will need to be taken in the socialist parties across Europe. But at the moment, the issue hasn't been addressed. And when the time comes, and when the European Socialist Party adds that issue to its agenda, then we will be part of that decision-making process. But as regards the Socialist and Democrat group at the moment, our role and responsibility is to work, to discuss and to propose the various policies that might be a success. And of course, we hope that we will get majority support in the forthcoming European elections so that we can put those policies into practice. So policies first and then people next.
Do we have other questions in the room? Anybody? If that is not the case, I would like to thank Iratxe and I would like to wish you all a good week. Merci beaucoup.